Hi everyone, this is Jordan Scheibel with Middle Way Farm. I'm on my way out to the field right now on a Saturday evening during the golden hour to pick some tomatoes that we didn't finish picking on Friday. I've got my my harvest bag on here, which is actually from a company that, or not a company, a nonprofit that sells these for gathering prairie seed, but they actually work pretty good as a harvest bag too. But I'm out here walking around and just feeling excited about some of the things I'm doing this fall that I want to share more widely through a video rather than just taking some pictures. So I'm going to show you a couple things that I'm doing this fall to keep the soil covered, which is a principle that I'm trying to implement on my farm because I think it equals soil health, and also to, as part of that, to minimize tillage or to eliminate it altogether. So behind me you'll see I've got some black tarp on the ground. And this is actually a silage tarp, so it's black on one side, white on the other. It's 5 mil, which is actually a little bit thin. I think if I buy again, I'm going to try to get something thicker, but this was cheaper. So what this tarp is doing right now is it is covering an area which was planted into winter wheat as a fallow plot this season. So I didn't plant any cash crops in here. I planted this winter wheat like right at the end of March. And this plot across the pathway right here, this is what that plot that's covered in the tarp looked like. I mowed it last week. I flail mowed it. It's the second time this season I've mowed it, so it's had several times to regrow. But my idea with the tarp is to try to kill that winter wheat cover crop without tilling it in, because the tillage kind of destroys a lot of the work that cover crop has been doing. And then I'm hoping to plant garlic here this fall. And I may need to do some tillage after I take off the tarp in order to prepare it to plant garlic, but I'm hoping to, minimize that tillage and have it not be so invasive or deep in order to destroy that crop. If I just need to disturb the top part of the soil in order to make it soft enough for me to plant into, that's different from having to really dig in with the tiller to try to uproot those plants. This plot that I just showed you, that's an experiment. I'm going to see if that winter wheat will actually remain alive over the winter, so see if it will actually overwinter as a cover crop after being planted the previous spring. I've never heard anyone talk about that, so that's part of having a farm, is you get to try things that you've never heard anyone doing. And sometimes you search the internet and you go, oh, someone actually did do that, but that's a fun part. Okay, over here, next to this tarp, you'll see I've got a buckwheat cover crop, which I'm very, very pleased with, and actually covered some of this cover crop with the tarp because it didn't germinate very well, and then I left these 5 beds because they germinated pretty well. But what I did with this buckwheat, this is where I had carrots and beets and spinach this spring, and I tilled it once, and then I had some weed growth on it, but not too bad. There weren't that many weeds. So what I did was I took a bucket and I spread the buckwheat over the bed with a bucket on pretty thickly, probably thicker than I should have, but I'm learning. And then I actually tilled that in with the tiller, but when I did it, I ran the tiller very shallow. I put the guide on the tiller down so that it kept the tines from digging in too much. And then I ran it on second gear, so a little bit faster, and on lower RPM, so those tines weren't rotating as fast, so they weren't pulverizing the soil as much. And the idea was to incorporate that buckwheat seed so that it would germinate, so that it would be able to germinate, because I wasn't drilling it with a seeder. I was just putting it on the surface. And then in this area over here that I covered with the tarp, I actually just raked it in, and it didn't germinate nearly as well. So I'm pretty convinced about the rototilling it in as a pretty viable method. You can also see that it's mainly on top of the beds, and the pathways, it really isn't in them, and that's intentional because I just spread the seed on top of the beds. And that's because I found it's kind of hard to mow the cover crop in those pathways because the mower gets kind of jacked up on its side. That's something I found with this winter wheat cover crop. And so what I'm doing going forward is just seeding the cover crop on top of the beds and leaving the pathways more or less empty. Although you can see that some buckwheat does get into the pathways. But, that's just kind of trying to figure out how to manage the pathways in addition to the bed, because when they're mounded up and raised, it's harder to mow them than if you're working with a flat surface. So I'm just going to show you one other thing that I'm doing with keeping the soil covered, in addition to cover crops and the silage tarp. Something else that I've been doing this season that's ongoing, but you can really see the fruits of it right now, is I've been using some permanent landscape fabric, or permanent as in 4 or 5 year landscape fabric, instead of using disposable plastic mulch for my warm season crops. And we just finished pulling the cucumbers, watermelon, and zucchini from these landscape fabric, and you see I actually burned holes into the landscape fabric at regular intervals, and then in the pathways that we've laid down straw mulch. So the soil is pretty much 100% covered in here. And what's interesting is that when I actually start to peel back this landscape fabric, which has been down since June, so it's been down for 10 weeks or so, what I'm seeing is there's tremendous earthworm activity underneath this landscape cloth. So I'll take my bag off. Check this out. Check that crumble out in the soil. See how crumbly that is? That's worm castings. And when I dig around in here, I find worms. They're coming right up to the surface, and they're feeding on residue on the surface. And because the sun isn't drying out that top layer, and it's not, making it hot, the earthworms are able to come up and do their work. It's amazing. And so it almost looks like that bed has had worm castings spread on it, but I didn't do anything. The worms did all the work. And I'm really interested in things that don't require me to work, because I already do a lot of work, and I'd like to figure out how to do less. And so if worms can do that work for me, then I don't have to haul that compost in. Although I probably still will haul compost in, but you get the idea. So anyway, I'm just feeling excited right now about progress on the farm. It's been a challenging season with weeds, with hot weather, with dryness, with diseases, which I'm still struggling with right now. But I'm really encouraged by some of these things that I'm learning about from other growers and then trying to implement on the farm. So before the sun goes down, I'm going to go ahead and get those tomatoes picked, and I'm going to sign off for now. This is Jordan Scheibel with Middle Way Farm.